Good morning.
Morning.
Or afternoon. Thank you all very much for being here, and thank you, David, for making this your 147th stop on your book tour.
How come I didn't get the Tinder guy?
You're seeing him tonight, actually.
Yeah.
So let me start by asking you a simple question. Is this the greatest book about humility ever written?
Yeah. No, this is the worst book about humility ever written.
It's the only appropriate.
I actually was going at one point I was going to call it Humility, and the cover was going to be in really small letters Humility, and then big letters David Brooks. That was going to...
Right. So let me ask you, and you should know, by the way, that we're old friends to the extent that David has friends and not shifting alliances. And so I'm going to do this in
Can
kind
we get
of
James Bennett out here?
Yeah, I'm going to do this in kind of a passive-aggressive way. Just 16 minutes of passive-aggressive interviewing. So there's this conundrum, I think, when you're writing a book about old virtues, including humility, gratitude, self-abnegation. Your heroes are not people who live the style of, say, Kanye West or Donald Trump, right? So one of the questions I have for you is, you know, you spent your life building up resume virtues. We were talking about this once. Is there some sort of weirdness or cognitive dissonance or hypocrisy in writing a #1 bestseller and becoming famous by talking about how unimportant and even hypocritical it is to be famous?
Yeah, well, I told Jeff backstage my role is C-SPAN Jesus now, or I go around the country.
You were just described as a prophet, by the way. If you were a prophet, which prophet would you be?
Gross prophet.
A gross prophet.
In my view, it's a balance. So one of the people I quote in the book is a guy named Joseph Soloveitchik, who wrote a book in 1965 called A Lonely Man of Faith. And he says we have two sides of our nature, which he calls Adam 1 and Adam 2. And Adam 1 is the external, success-oriented side of our nature, and wants to build and create. And Adam 2 is the internal side of our nature. And he says they're both fine. But the question is the balance between the two. And the balance is difficult because they sort of are engaged in different tasks. Adam 1 wants to go out and create and build and make some money and have some fame, and that's fine. Adam 2 wants to serve, wants to be humble. Adam 1 wants to venture forth. Adam 2 wants to return home to a family meal. Adam 1 asks how things exist. Adam 2 asks why things exist and what ultimately we're here for. Adam 1 has sort of an economic logic to the way that part of our nature works, which is straightforward: input leads to output, effort leads to reward, practice makes perfect. But Adam 2 has an inverse moral logic, a moral logic and not an economic one. And so you have to give to receive, you have to surrender to something outside yourself to gain strength within yourself, you have to lose yourself to find yourself. And he says these two sides of our nature are both in us, but you got to balance them out. And I would say we live in a culture that encourages us to have pretty clear about our character, but not so clear about how to build that inner side. I just saw a study that came out recently from Harvard. They asked junior high school kids, 10,000 of them, do your parents care more about you getting good grades or being kind? And 80% of the kids said, my parents care more about me getting good grades. And I think back on my own parenting when my kids were that age, I probably nagged them more about grades. And so we just think about that, and we're clear about that. And this book is about people who had good careers, George Marshall, Francis Perkins, Dorothy Day. But at 20, morally, they were a mess. By 70, morally, they were magnificent. And I just want to know how they did it.
When did you start worrying about your eulogy as opposed to your resume?
Well, a couple things happened. I didn't have the midlife crisis. I think if I had, the Porsche would have been fine. I think that would have done it. But, you run into people who are inspiring. And I think it was sort of that. And so it was like a couple people. I ran into, recently I ran into, this is such an Atlantic thing to say. I was seated at lunch next to the Dalai Lama. It was at Taco Bell.
And the
by
Dalai
way.
Lama is the Dalai Lama is such a name dropper, by the way.
I
Right?
know.
Yeah.
He's been talking about me all week.
He's like Pope Francis this,
this,
Pope Francis that,
that.
right?
So the guy like radiates this light, and he laughs at completely unexpected moments. And so like he'll just sit with you, and he'll just start cracking up, and you want to be polite, and so you start cracking up. And I was so nervous around him. So here's a little canvas bag, and so I asked him, "You got any candy in your bag?" And so he starts pulling out stuff from the bag, and it's basically everything you get on the first-class cabin of an international flight. It's like a little eyepiece, a little ear, a little razor, Toblerone bar, though. But so my reaction with those people, or just regular people you meet who just radiate goodness, and we all know them, is like I've achieved way more career success than I ever thought I would, but I haven't achieved that inner light. And you only go around once in life, and you might as well try to get that. And we live in Washington, the most emotionally avoidant city on the face of the earth. And you want to try to get deeper and better through life. I think we're all given a moral imagination to just try to be better.
Well, let me go to that because it's interesting. And one of the things that you notice about this book, by the way, I read this book while I was sitting by the pool at a very nice hotel in Lisbon, and it made me feel so bad about sitting by that I dropped it and picked up a Dan Silva novel. But I did finish it in a very self-abnegating way.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you notice is that most of your heroes are dead. And the obvious question is someone who writes a lot about politics in America is could an Eisenhower survive in the American political climate today? Or let me focus this even more sharply and say, who on the American scene today is someone who possesses the virtues that you have come to admire? And is it even possible to have those virtues and succeed in public life?
Yeah. So I think it's obviously much harder because the publicity is such, and they're basically in the business of selling themselves all the time. And so what happens, and we cover these people all the time, they lose the inner voice. There's like everybody in a business, if you're sales, whatever, you got to spin. But you should have some earnest, honest voice, a still and soft voice inside where you're actually telling yourself the truth. And I find that gets hollowed out in the people we cover. Like John Hay was Abraham Lincoln's one of his staffers in the Civil War, and he's writing these publicity things, which he has to do for morale. It's like, we're winning this war, General Meade is the greatest general in the history of mankind. Then he writes a diary at night, and it says, my God, we're losing, General Meade, what a schmuck. And it's like, and I find most politicians, they get hollowed out and lose that voice. But I do think there are some people who exemplify the balance between really inner goodness and outer performance that I'm looking for. And so I keep a list of people in Washington who I think are genuinely good. And there are people like,
Am I number one or number two?
Let's move on.
Yeah.
There are people like Elliot Spitzer, Anthony Weiner,
Yeah.
No, but a few people come to mind. Our UN ambassador, Samantha Power, I think she exemplifies just inner passion and idealism without her performance. He's not in politics, but he's someone I admire, though I don't really know him, a guy named Atul Gawande, the writer, who operates, and he's a surgeon, a group not known for their humility, but his mind works in a way that he stresses the complexity of the human body and how little we can know about it. And then, I used to work with a guy named Jim Lehrer on the NewsHour. And for the first 10 years, when I would talk to him on TV, when I would say something crass and superficial, I would see his mouth turn down in displeasure. And when I said something he liked, his eye would wrinkle with joy. And so basically for 10 years, I just was trying to avoid the mouth turning down and get the eye thing. And so that's the way mentors actually teach, just with little small gestures. And there are those people around.
Stay on this for one more second and answer that question. Is it possible in the media-saturated environment? You write in the book very feelingly about how we augment ourselves now through Facebook. We have this sort of, we set up these highlight reels of our lives, which we project out into the world, the best images that you can. Is it possible to be real in this way and succeed in politics? I mean, I don't want to bring up individual candidates, but I mean, are there people out there you think who can survive as whole humans in the environment?
I think it's just more challenging Actually, I'm reminded, a couple days ago I was on a plane, and I was sitting next to a young woman who was 18, and she had a Galaxy phone, and she had vines of herself, like just a lot of these little videos of herself doing funny expressions and faces. And for 2 hours, the entire flight, she just watched videos of herself. And I felt like saying,
this is pure narcissist.
Yeah, I felt like saying,
pure...
I want to give you a book. I got a book for you. But I think it's harder because, A, they're on the run. Like I mentioned, the Adam 1 sins, they're on the run, and all their life is spent in external success. So they don't have time for this soft, still voice. Second, they're amplifying themselves at all times. How can I be bigger? How can I be out there? And so the idea of selflessness and of humility, to me, humility is not thinking lowly of yourself. It's accurate self-awareness from a distance. And it's basically recognizing your own sinfulness. And I insist on that word.
Our culture won't reward that in real time. It will reward it 100 years after you've lived, right? But it won't reward it.
I don't agree with that. I think, in general, the people who are moral, and most moral, are good at relationships. They're honest and trustworthy. And you need that to build relationships. And sometimes you need to sacrifice your career, and this is what I look for in candidates. What would they sacrifice their career for, if anything? I have a friend who hires a lot of people, and in every job interview he asks this question, name a time you told the truth and it hurt you. And so with my college students, I tell them, you got to learn to fake that one. But he's basically asking them, are there times where you're willing to put Adam 2 above Adam 1? And in our candidates, in my view, that's what we should look for. Now, I should say the world of public opinion now is so tough-minded. People have stopped looking for that. I noticed a poll of Hillary Clinton. They asked independent voters, is Hillary Clinton a strong leader? 67% said yes. Then they asked, is she honest and trustworthy? 67% said no. So they think she's dishonest, untrustworthy, and a strong leader. I do not think that's possible. I think if you're basically untrustworthy, your Watergate will come, and you will not be a successful politician.
So answer this question. Answer this question. When is a time in your life that you told the truth and it hurt you?
I've always disliked you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, that doesn't hurt. That might net out positive. That might. I'm the passive-aggressive one here. Okay. Let's just wait. No, can you? I mean, you've written this book and you're talking about other people, but I want to talk about you a little bit. I mean, do you live up to this book now? I mean, go back to that question, because it's an important question. Have you done something to subvert your resume that could have subverted your resume?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the things that one does that hurt you are, there are a lot of things in private life I won't get into, but in public life, I mean, this is something we did, and a couple years ago when the Iraq War went bad, I wrote a series of columns about what I got wrong. And I was a supporter of the war, obviously. And what I found in that exercise was that your friends are really mad at you, and the people who opposed the war are even madder. They sense weakness and they pounce on you. And I remember a bunch. You
don't get rewarded for telling that kind of truth necessarily in the public arena?
No, and I understand why politicians never admit error, because the people who disagree with you just sense vulnerability. And so I remember weeks of really, in the whole column career, those were the weeks of sleeplessness. And I suppose that was the time I told the truth, and it hurt me, but if it hurt my feelings anyway.
Right. Right.
But it's not like people are shooting at us, so.
Right. So go to this. This is the interesting thing to me is it's easy. It would be easy to live some of the virtues you describe if you were to do that thing that we all think we're going to do, go live on a mountaintop alone, which we could probably all of us do for 3 days before we get bored and have to come back down the mountain. But without separating yourself out from society and its complications and its mess, how do you incorporate these values and still be a Wall Street titan, a foundation head, a journalist? That's the question, and let me make it personal to you. How are you trying to do this in your own life so that at the end of your life you will have somebody will have a eulogy to give that you want to hear, would want to hear? It's
sort of a long journey where you try to get better a little every day. And so I think the first thing you do is you sit down, maybe keep a journal, and you say, what's my core sin? Is it vanity? Is it ego? I have a friend in the city here his sin is hardness of heart. He's a busy guy. People come to him with their problems, and he doesn't really, he's not really present for them often. He's thinking about the next appointment. He's in a meeting. He's not really listening to them. He's saying, he's thinking, well, what can I say to make myself appear clever? And so he sits at night, literally lies in bed and thinks, how did I do today on that? And how can I do a little better tomorrow? It's just like a long, constant journey. And so my sins, and to be blunt, are two that I think about. One is a tendency towards shallowness, just to get by on glibness, and it is true for a lot of us who have above average communication skills. You can do that. And so partly writing this book was an effort to go down into something deeper and communicate it to people. And the second, which is hard for people in our business, but a desire to please everybody all the time. And so sometimes you have to get involved in conflict, and sometimes you have to have the hard conversation. And for some of us, that's a very hard thing to do, to have a hard, honest conversation. And believe me, reading and writing a book about character does not get you there. You got to actually live it out. But I think what the people in the book, whether it's Francis Perkins or George Marshall or St. Augustine, they hold up a standard, and they become people you surround yourself with, who you become sort of in silent conversation with. I was in Monticello a couple weeks ago, and Jefferson put on his wall all the dead people he admired most. And I think they became his friends, his sort of posse, and he was in conversation with them. They were the standard. That's what he wanted to live up to. There's a constant process of holding up a high standard for yourself, and that you're emotionally warmed by. And these characters, for me, they're like my friends now.
Can you do this without being religious? Does it make it much harder to do this without having faith in God?
Yeah, I observe the world. I know many faithful people who are just deeply wonderful, who just radiate that inner life. I meet a lot of secular atheist people who are completely wonderful and radiate that inner light. So I just observe empirically. I've seen people of all sorts who have what we should all seek. And so I think it's completely possible to do it without faith. I just look at people who have done it. The one thing I do think you need some of the words that have been handed down to us by different religious traditions. They're words like sin, grace, redemption, soul, spirit, salvation. And without those words, it's really hard to understand the moral drama that's going on inside. You just don't have any handholds. There's nothing to label it with. And one of the problems with my students, with a lot of people today, it's not that they're bad. They just don't have a moral vocabulary. There's a guy at Notre Dame named Christian Smith who asked college students, name your last moral dilemma. And 70% of them could not name a moral dilemma. They said, I pulled in a parking space, but I didn't have quarters. And he said, that's sort of a problem. It's not really a moral dilemma. And he said, they're not bad. They just haven't been given the words. And so I think having the words is important if you're going to understand why every day is a moral drama with the stakes are high. Are you turning your soul into something better than it was or something a little worse? And if you don't have those words, you can't really understand what's going on.
David, thank you very much for talking to us. It's great. Thank you.